a little bit in terms of what processing is and how it works with some examples. Some of the management pieces we've been going through, there's a list of these, but processing today, I think we've already looked a little bit at publishing, the dashboard, and then we've got some of these other items that are coming up in future weeks. GeoSync GO Cloud Service is a geospatial toolbox. We need to continue to remember that it is a toolbox, and processing is one of the tools it's a critical tool, but it's one of the tools that's in the toolbox. And it's always operated from the desktop software, so that's where we'll focus in today. Processing tools are located in desktop and not in any of the mobile software. Just an overview of how GeoSync GO, the cloud service, is organized, and particularly thinking about this from what we're looking at today. From our mobile devices, part of the benefit of GeoSync GO is that ability to fill out a form in the field. And that information, we use the cloud to transport that back to our office, and then processing takes place when we take those field reports and we actually write those to the database. And so this is sort of the final step in the data management process, because we take the information from the field and actually get it into our database. And just remember that processing is part of our typical workflow process. So this is when we look at any of the workflows in GeoSync GO, we can fit almost all of those. Well, we really can fit all of those into this cycle. We have a design and setup phase for any workflow that we're working on, and then once we implement that workflow, we have publishing, where we take information and make it available for use in the field. In the field, we will use our map, and we'll do inquiry. We'll look stuff up. We'll find locations. Then we can use our field form to do inspection. We fill out information about a feature or an inspection or some event that's going on in the field, and then that information passes back through the cloud, and then we need to process that information to the database, and that's what we'll look at today. So processing really is all about reading reports from the inbox and then updating our workflow table. There is an optional part of that, which is what we would call a staged update, and in that case we can actually intercept that updating process and have a chance to actually review those reports before we do a final update. As I said, the processing tools are all run from the desktop software, from the manager, and this is a screenshot of the desktop manager, which you'd be aware of. So when we're thinking about processing, data comes from the cloud inbox to the desktop, and then processing takes the field reports and then writes those to our workflow database. That's the basic flow of information. And this is a little more detailed description of what happens in processing. So let me take you through this diagram so we can kind of understand the flow of data. But from the mobile device, we use a form that we've created. We fill out the form, and when we save that form, it becomes what we would call a saved report or a saved field report. That field report then is transported via the internet to our cloud inbox. So if we think about that part of the process and go back and think about that in terms of a paper process, we might have had a clipboard in the field, is what we might used to have done. We fill out a clipboard, we have a piece of paper, we bring that back to the office, and we actually put that filled out form or piece of paper in a tray inbox in the office. That's the same thing we're doing here, except we're letting the technology take care of that, so there's no paper associated with it, and we don't actually have to make it back to the office or put it in the mail to get that information back to the office. We allow the technology to transport that saved report for us. So once the information is in the inbox, Then from while we're in the office, then from the desktop software, we sync the reports from the inbox to the desktop, and then that report then gets processed to our database. So again, that would be the same thing in the office. The field reports and paper went into a tray, an inbox. A technician in the office pulls that piece of paper out of the inbox, types that information into a spreadsheet or into a database, and then that becomes a report or a summary of the results that go on to a manager or somebody else to look at. So the processing is actually that act of taking that information from the inbox and writing it into either into a database or a spreadsheet. And what we want to do is eliminate that manual step. We no longer have to do that. We can let the software, the processing tool that we have, software to allow us to automatically get that information written into our database, or which ultimately could be a spreadsheet or other type of report. So we look at from processing how this actually works. We have a field form. This is the form as it's been designed, and from the workflow wizard, if you're designing your form, this is a screenshot from there. What you do for your field form is you define a field, and then some of the input, whether it's a list or a text or a date field, and then in the field we're going to fill out this information in the form. When this form comes back as a saved report, that is, the blank form has got data associated with it, then the processing tool will come through and read through the form, and it looks for these field names, such as request type, and then it comes to our database and it tries to match, and it will try to match back to a field name in the database and then write the information from the saved report to the database. And that's how the process works. So the information from the form is matched up based on the field name. So some of the keys to this is field names have to match. If you're creating a form and you want the processing tool to work properly, then field names have to match. The name in the form needs to match the name in the database. They don't have to be in the same order, but they have to match exactly. If you use the tools that are available in the workflow wizard to be able to build your form, it's going to take care of that, and it will identify for you any mismatches that might occur. Some other things that are somewhat important in this processing process is that data types have to be compatible. So as an example, if our database field is a date, but the information that we entered in the field was a number or something that's not a date, then we're not going to get an effective update of that. That processing tool is going to fail on that particular piece of data. It's not going to work. Also, data size and field size must be compatible. So if we set up our database with a field length of 10 characters, but we enter 100 characters in the field, we're not going to get that information to match. The processing tool is going to try to work through as many of those things as it can. You don't have to have exact matches all the time. It's going to be a little bit flexible, but there are certain situations where it just cannot move data from the field form into the database, and those will create an error. So we need to be aware of those things as we design our process and make sure that that the data in the form and the data in the database are compatible. One of the important things that I'll mention here is that when you build a new workflow, you should always test that workflow up front. So if you build a form and you've got a process you're going to go out to do inspections, then you should test that, have the data run all the way through, and just make sure that all the information is making its way all the way from the field into the database and the processing is working properly. So a few more things on this about processing. As we've said, it has to be initiated by the manager software. So data that comes from the field is not going to get written to the database just automatically with there isn't any situation where that just happens. So processing, if you want to process those reports that were collected in the field, then it has to be initiated by the manager software in some way. When you build a field form, field forms or workflow forms are already assigned to a workflow table. So processing in that sense is somewhat automatic. So when the desktop manager reads a report from the field, it already knows what table it needs to update that information into. That's all part of the design process. So if you build the workflow properly, then that'll be taken care of. Also, processing occurs based on project and form. So we can control our processing by project, and then each form has its own process associated with it. And what's important to that is if you have multiple workflows and you want to focus in and only work with one of those workflows, you can isolate that for that particular form, such as you're doing construction inspection, you could process that, but you have some other reports coming in that might be related to site investigation or leak detection, and you can choose when you're gonna process and work through those records. There are two primary approaches for processing, and that is you turn the process tool on, and it goes ahead and writes the information from the field form to the database to its end location. Or the second one is that we put another step in there where we have the ability, we write that information and we have the chance to review the information before it goes to its final destination. And we'll look at both of those examples in just a minute. So when you're doing the review, you have the ability to reject or delete or edit the data before it goes to its final location. So we kind of have a staging table, if you will, where we can review the information. Also, there is, for processing from the desktop manager, you sign into your account and you can manually start and stop any process at any time. So for each form, based on form and project, you can start and stop the process. You can also set up an auto start configuration for processing. So if once you've tested your workflows and you know that everything's working properly, it might be advantageous for you to have this processing start automatically when you sign into your account. You can set up an auto start configuration so that as soon as you sign into the desktop manager, the processing starts just automatically in the background and runs. Now, one thing about that is at this point, if you do the auto start configuration, all report processing, all that you have set up, or all the forms that you have, will all start when you sign in. You can't really designate one form to be processed over another form in the auto start configuration. That's not available at this time. There will be some additional configuration items or options coming, but for right now it's kind of all or nothing. You can start all the processes or automatically, or you can do them manually one at a time. That'll make a little more sense when we actually look at how the processes are set up. So if you want to launch the tool, the processing tool, there's two places that you can do that from the desktop manager. One is you can go to one of the main menus, go down to Office Processing and Publishing and start report processing. The way this is set on up over here, the tool, or at the bottom of the map, the bottom of the interface, there is a label called Processing. You can click on that label. Either one of those will launch the processing tool. And this is what the processing tool looks like. It's fairly simple. It's going to open up, and you can do most everything you need from the status tab. And this is an example of the process 1, and this is workflow training. That's the name of my GeoSync GO project. Site investigation is the name of my workflow or my form that I'm using, and this gives me an idea that this process is actually running. One thing I will say, or just point out, that the caption on the top of this tool says report monitoring. It doesn't say processing. So the processing tool is labeled report monitoring. That's kind of a carryover from some of the earlier versions that we had. But just to point that out, this is the processing tool. This is the only tool that exists to do all of the processing in GeoSync GO. When we want to, if we want to start a process, we can have a number of these processes in place. We can select the process and hit the start button, or we can start all, and this will start working. And what's going on here is when this process is started, in the case of this process 1, what it's doing is it's looking at the inbox for any forms, any saved reports that use the site investigation form. If it finds one of those, it reads that, writes the information to the appropriate workflow database table. So it looks, it's monitoring all the time, probably every 20, 30 seconds it goes out there and looks. If it finds a report that matches this configuration, then it's going to write that information to the database. There's also said there is a review report tool, so there is a staged option here. So if you're going to use that part of the process, if you have that set up, then the review report tool you find from one of the main tabs above the map window. So you see the map, come across this icon with a little workflow icon. Open that up, pick the appropriate workflow process, and the example we have here is we've got a field report, and what we're looking at is we have the to option. This is the final destination for that report. You notice there's a lot of information not there. This is what we filled out in the field, and we've added more information and answered some questions related to this particular database record. And if we accept this, then these settings or these values will be updated to the final destination. If we decide that this is incorrect for some reason, then we can reject this report and not do a final update. So we have a chance to review the work that was done in the field before we accept it and do a final update to our data set. Okay, so we want to go out and actually do some examples of processing so we get a better feel for how this works. I'm going to go to my GeoSync GO desktop. I have a project set up here. I've got a couple of simple examples. So if we're looking for our processing tool, we have two places we can go. We can go here to our Manager Tools, Office Processing, Report Processing, and open up our process tool or report monitoring tool. I'm going to hide that, or I can get to that also by coming to this label at the bottom of the screen called Processing. Select on that, and that's going to open up this same dialog. Now, in this particular dialog, we have a total of we have four potential projects or four processes that we can start and run. And again, these are tied together. This is the project name, and this is the form name, and we can start these individually, or we can start all of those by clicking the Start All button. We'll start all the processes are running. When I do this, then the processing tool is monitoring the inbox, and if it finds an activity training form that's filled out that matches to the web map training project, and it will process that form to its appropriate database table. same thing for each one of these others. The other 3 are associated with the workflow training project, and we have a site investigation form, we have a good housekeeping form, and an activity training form. I'm going to stop these processes. To stop them, we just select them, click the stop button, and then they just stop. They stop processing. And when they're stopped, that just means they're not looking, they're not monitoring the inbox anymore. They're just sitting there, and records will be accumulating in the cloud inbox. Let's do an example of this. I'm gonna open up a layer here called my site investigation layer. And if you notice, I have one record here that's in play. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pretend we're in the field, and we're going to fill out a form, create a field report. I'm just going to set a location on the map, and then I'm going to use the tool to create report. And this gives me a list of different forms that I have available. This is the site investigation form. I'm going to create a new report. I'm going to give it a name here called Test 5, and we won't put any other information in there right now. I'm just going to save that report. Now, that report is saved. We're going to look at the inbox. We have an option here at there's a label here called reports. We open this up. This will give us a view of actually what's in the cloud. This is a view of the cloud inbox, and we'll notice that there's a report sitting here in the inbox. So if we think about that, if we'd done that manually, we would have filled this out in the field using a pencil and paper and a clipboard, taking that piece of paper, put it in the inbox. So if we were going through the inbox and looking, we would find this particular report. Now, I can view these. I can review what's in the inbox by coming to this tool, and then I can open it up and actually preview that. So when you open it up and look at it and see, we see this is the report that we just filled out called Test 5. So these are unprocessed reports. These are sitting in the inbox. They're waiting for some kind of action. Now that we want to process those, we're going to go to our processing tool, and we're going to turn on our site investigation process. Let that run. And then we're going to see what happens. Now if we go back to our reports, our view of the inbox, we'll notice that report is now gone out of the inbox. It's no longer there. And if I open my site investigation layer again, we'll see that there's now a new point. Test 5 has now been written to the workflow database. It's now actually a feature. So we process that report to the database, and it's now at its final location in the database. So from here, then we have the ability, if we needed to edit that record or export that record or whatever we wanted to do with it, we can now do that from the desktop. So let's kind of review that again. We set a point, we filled out a field form, saved it, and then the processing tool read that saved report, wrote it to the database, and now it's available for my use on the desktop. That's the basic flow of data. So let's go ahead and try that again. If we set another point, fill out another form, site investigation, we'll call this Test 8, save that report, and then if we refresh our layer, we now have a database record. So the processing is running, so that report, as soon as it went to the inbox, the processing found that report, wrote it to the database, and now it's created a new site investigation feature for us. So that's the basic process, or that's the way processing works. Now we had another approach to processing is where we wanted some sort of a staged process. We wanted to have the ability to capture those field reports first, review them, and then have the chance to update our final database record. So let's take a look at how that might work. So in this case, I'm going to go back to my processing tool, and I'm going to stop this process. So we're back to we have no report processing going on at all. I'm going to change layers to good housekeeping. And so here's the deal with this. We have a number of locations in our region that we need to visit on a regular basis and do a questionnaire. What we're looking for is any sort of hazardous material that might be stored on site, and that could change over time. So what we want to do is we want to go to that site, use a tablet, fill out the report. We want to be able to have a record of the information that we picked up in the field, but then once we approve that, we want to update the master record so that anybody goes to look at that particular facility information, such as this Lexington site, they're going to have an idea of what kind of materials might be there, hazardous material or any other types of information that might have an impact on stormwater. So let's go look. We got 3 different sites: Paris site, Winchester site, and the Lexington site. If I select the Lexington site, in this case we've got a location. We really don't have any information in here regarding the it looks like nothing has been done in terms of an inspection. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use our Create Report tool, and we're going to use our Good Housekeeping form. Open that up, and we'll notice here this form is a fairly sophisticated form. We've got the Lexington site. We could go ahead and fill out an address. We could make, okay, we're on site filling this out. Blazer, contact is David. We could say what kind of pollutants are here. Again, hazardous materials. Yes, they have some. What pollutant comments is acid. Anyway, we can go through and fill out this information, whatever that is, and we're going to save this report. In this case, I'm going to go back and look at my inbox, and you'll see that report is now in the inbox. This is my Good Housekeeping report, the one that I just filled out. It's sitting out there in the inbox waiting for something to happen with it. I'm going to start my processing. Here's my Good Housekeeping for my workflow training project. I'm going to start that process and let it run. And in this case, we said we wanted a staged, we wanted the chance to review that process. We want a chance to review that record before we do a final update. I'm going to go to my my review tool, and here's the location of that tool. It's under this tab. And the way this works is this opens up, we get processes, and then we have an opportunity to pick. So every single workflow could have its own review process set up. But the one I want to use is the Good Housekeeping update process. That's the one I'm working with. And you'll notice at this point there's actually two inspections that have been done that are waiting for review. So if we open this up, we'll go back. The first one is at a Paris site. Someone made this visit. Here's the information that was filled out. This is my current record that I have, and so I'm going to look at this and say, okay, well, I really do want to update this information. This is important for me to know. I'm okay with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to accept this record, and then I can process it. And then what that just did is that updated my final record. I can go look at the other one. The one we just did was my Lexington site. I can review this. Yes, I'm good with this information. I'm going to accept it, process it, and then that record has now been written to my final Good Housekeeping destination. So let's prove that that's the case. We'll refresh our layer. If we go to the Paris site, then all of a sudden we see we've got these answers to these other questions. If we look at the Lexington site, then we notice that we do have a hazardous material, which is yes, and the pollutant comment is it's acid, which is what we just filled out. So just then to review this, in order to do the review process, then that has to be part of the design. When you design the workflow, you have an opportunity to set the to establish this form and this workflow process to allow you to do the review in the way we just did it. So that's part of the design. And when we get into going through the workflow wizard and how we set that up, we can discuss about, you know, how you do that. But you have two options on the processing. You do have a chance to capture the report and review it and edit it before you do a final update, or the report can come in and you can send it directly to the database. In most cases, for the work that's done, it's okay for the field reports to go directly to the database without having that review, but in some cases you do want to intercept it, and that does provide an option for you to do that. So let's go back to our PowerPoint. I want to go back to this process just for a minute and just kind of run back through that. So from the processing, we're going to take a field form, we save it, it goes to the inbox. Through using the desktop manager, we process that saved report with the information and we write it to our workflow table, which is very similar to having a spreadsheet. We put it in that particular spreadsheet with a defined set of columns, and then that information is available for us to report on and analyze. And here, okay, and that really finishes up our processing review, an overview of how we process and what that means in GeoSync GO. Again, if you have questions, you can send those to info@cdpengineers.com.